Good afternoon, everybody. I'm so pleased to be here. And thanks so much to the Center for the Study of Islam and Democracy for putting together this very important and timely conference on democracy denied. I cannot think of a more timely moment to talk about this important and pressing topic. So I'm going to be talking today about the democratic backlash in Tunisia and its implications on the media sphere, from liberation to repression, the shifting political and media landscapes in Tunisia. So I'm going to, of course, try to skip a lot of these slides I have prepared just in the interest of time. I will just say that this topic is really dear and near to my heart in so many ways because I have written a lot about the topic of democratization and socio-political transformation and transition in the Arab region, especially in the lead up to the Arab Spring, in the midst of the Arab Spring, and then the aftermath of the Arab Spring. And I've written passionately about Tunisia being a model, a positive model for political transition in a smooth way that was bloodless, did not have violence, but had a smooth transition. And of course, I was heartbroken by the series of events that erupted recently in this country and unfortunately had negative implications on both the political and media spheres, as I'm going to be discussing in more depth and details. Of course, as we all know, the Arab Spring moment was a euphoric moment, politically euphoric. There was all of this hope for political transition and transformation in the country, and how social media and other types of youth-based types of digital activism were playing a very important, pivotal role in the midst of the uprisings to bring about a hopeful transition to democratization and reform. And we saw a lot of the scholarship that has been written at that time, including my own writing, talking about this particular moment. International media was also talking about the role of social media, how there has been this kind of youth-led movement that was really aiming at political transition and transformation. Unfortunately, things did not go as desired, and we have seen a backlash in many of the Arab Spring countries, Egypt, Bahrain, Yemen, Libya, and Syria, and most recently, unfortunately, Tunisia, creating what we can describe as authoritarian reassertion of authoritarianism, bringing back authoritarianism again to the fore in so many different and dangerous ways. So, of course, the new reality now for Arab journalists in the midst of this kind of democratic backlash has been intimidation, imprisonment, being forcibly disappeared, arrests, harassment, targeting journalists, bloggers, and activists, shutting down media organizations, and blocking websites. And that is the sad reality now for journalism and journalists in the so-called post-Arab Spring countries. Now, the Tunisian exceptionalism is a term that I'm sure many of you read about in the literature about the Arab Spring, when we all talked about, oh, Tunisia was the only exception, the only country that survived the tumultuous waves of the Arab Spring uprisings and emerged as a successful model, and therefore the term Tunisian exceptionalism is something that dominated the literature on the Arab Spring. However, unfortunately, there has been a setback. The end of Tunisian exceptionalism on the night of July 25th, 2021, we have seen the confiscation of powers by the current president, Tunisian President Kais Saied, who unfortunately is an assistant professor of law himself, and there was an expectation for him to uphold the rule of law in the country and to be someone who is going to champion the rule of law. But unfortunately, he has issued a decree that confiscated a lot of powers, ended a lot of parliamentary legislative powers, has been able to fire a lot of judges and hire judges that would be more, in line with his own policies. And that has been described as, quote unquote, a presidential coup in Tunisia. That, of course, constrained the political as well as the media landscape. I always say that media and politics are two sides of the same coin. We can never divorce or separate politics from media. Whatever happens in the political sphere will inevitably spill over into the media sphere and have some kind of negative implications in that particular case. So we have seen many reports talking about violations against journalists and press institutions in Tunisia, which have escalated since President Kais Saied announced his quote-unquote exceptional measures in July 2021. And in the aftermath of these particular measures by Qais Said, we have seen a shrinking margin of press freedom and media freedom in Tunisia, taking many different forms: the imprisonment of many journalists, the closing down and shutting down of many media organizations and press institutions, and even some journalists are being put on trial and some websites have been blocked. So the new reality of Tunisian journalists now, unfortunately, is coming much closer to the reality of the journalists in the so-called post-Arab Spring countries in terms of the long list of negative consequences. We have seen, for example, the shutting down of certain media outlets, the headquarters of different media outlets like Al Jazeera, Al Zaytuna TV, Al Arabi TV has been closed down, detaining of dozens of journalists in various, according to various charges, and assaulting others who were covering different protests. And therefore, the regime also used many exceptional legal and punitive measures, such as cybercrime laws, in order to crack down on journalists under the guise or the mantle or the excuse of spreading disinformation. And I want to highlight this particular point because the legal aspect is extremely important. Whenever an Arab government wants to crack down on journalists and media people, the best thing for them to do is to say, oh, we're going to issue a new cybercrime law. These laws are usually broad, vague, on purpose, in order to give the government as much leeway as possible in terms of using it as an excuse for saying this journalist is spreading disinformation or misinformation, therefore we're going to crack down, we're going to arrest this person and charge them. Well, we have also recent examples. The Committee to Protect Journalists has been talking about different cases where journalists have been arrested. Zaid Al-Hini, who's a prominent columnist and political commentator, has been arrested because he simply has been critical of the regime. Also other cases as well of different journalists who have been arrested and put to trial because of their own political views. One of them also is the reporter for Al Jazeera, Samir Sassi, and these are just a few examples among many others. However, it is fair to say that Tunisian journalists are not just taking all of that quietly and without any kind of resistance. The fact is, Tunisian journalists are, to their own credit, pushing back and resisting against different forms of authoritarianism by the regime. They're pushing back against repression in different ways. They are actually arranging sit-ins and protests and signing petitions, making sure their voice is reaching international and global media, and making sure the resistance is heard not just locally but also regionally and internationally and globally. So to take a futuristic outlook, the ongoing push and pull struggle, it is very likely, looking ahead, that the tug of war between the Tunisian regime and the journalists who dare to speak truth to power will continue both online and offline, at home and in the diaspora, triggering ongoing cycles of contestation between authoritarianism on one hand and independent journalism on the other hand. As part of these ongoing struggles, which are triggered by journalistic challenges to political autocracy and authoritarianism, new tools will be invented by both parties as they constantly build their own learning curves and master new tools and techniques to challenge one another in these continuous political and mediated contestations. In other words, it's not going to be like one party is only building its tools and sharpening its mechanisms and strategies. The chances are the regime will continue to try to confiscate these powers and to really shrink the margin of freedom, but the Tunisian journalists are also most likely to continue to push back and resist in an ongoing push and pull struggle. Thank you so much, and I'm more than ready to take your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Sahar, for respecting the time, first of all. You did exactly 10 minutes, but also for giving us the hope that people in Tunisia are resisting the dictatorship. Not only the journalists, but the lawyers are also doing an excellent job. The politicians are also doing an excellent job. The top leaders of all the political parties are in jail now. They have been in jail for a year or more, but they're still resisting and they're still speaking up against dictatorship. So that's why I really remain optimistic about Tunisia. There is a dictatorship, but I don't think that the dictatorship will last, or that the dictatorship can last, because it's because of the resistance of the people who have tasted freedom and democracy for a while, you know, and it wasn't a perfect democracy, but they tasted freedom, and I think once you taste freedom and democracy, you cannot go back to tasting, to accepting dictatorship. And there are a lot of people, I have a lot of friends who are in jail now because they wrote something on their Facebook or on their Twitter, and they were arrested and sentenced to jail just for their comment on Facebook. But still people are writing, and still people are speaking up. So our third speaker is Sam Green, professor and co-chair of the Department of Social and Applied Behavioral Sciences at Sheffield University. He will speak about the Tunisian democratic decline in comparative perspective. Professor Green.